So I thought we would just do a little bit of a background just to kind of explain why we're doing the presentation together. So I do work in engineering, but I am a chemist by training. So within our department, I'm responsible for our applied chemistry laboratories, mainly because my responsibility is to teach students about chemical waste and safety within a lab-based scale. And then my colleague, Ariel, will introduce herself.
Hi, I'm Ariel Chen. I'm also in chemical engineering department and applied chemistry. My main responsibility is teaching the third year unit operations laboratory. So those are more of a scale up, mimicking or simulating the industrial production process. Very soon you will see some of the pictures of our laboratory settings. And our students learn from microscales, and they see the size gets bigger, and then how we change from manpower to automated process. And this is where we have a lot of collaboration and integration between our curriculums.
So hopefully by the end of our talk, we will be able to convince you that there's different safety considerations depending on the environment that you're working in. And I can appreciate that not all of you work in a lab-based environment. So we're going to have a couple of questions to get you thinking about safety within your own work environment and what that would look like in different resources that are available on campus that you could essentially be improving the safety environment within, your own workplace. So just to kind of bring it into an engineering context, we have the Canadian Engineering Accreditation Association, and we have to look at our graduate attributes. We can see 1 through 12 in our pictogram there. And within our courses, Ariel and I look at problem analysis. We have engineering tools and investigation, communication skills, individual teamwork, and those kind of span between 1 and 12. But one area that we look at is around professionalism, and what we really feel, and given the profession that we're teaching our students to go into, safety is a really big part of that. And we're not just looking at chemical and process safety. If you even think about mental health and awareness within the workplace, there's all different types of safety aspects that we do feel goes underneath that professionalism graduate attribute. And we've been able to work with our department, taking some things that were set up before we got there, and then we've been improving on things to look at how we can include safety education in years 1 through 4 within our department. So with respect to chemical and process incidents, we are really big believers, and trust me when I say there's lots of research to show that while you can include simulation and virtual lab environments and VR reality or virtual reality within a laboratory curriculum, there's still something to be said about going there yourself and being able to use your senses to recognize when something's going wrong. It's really hard to simulate, a smell like a chemical exposure. Is that something that's going to be toxic to you? Not, is it supposed to smell? How could you reduce that smell by working, let's say, in a fume hood in a more ventilated area? Those are all things that are really difficult, I would say, to replicate within an online environment. So one thing that the pandemic really did show us is the value of having these in-person experiences. That's not to say that there's not a lot of value in doing things in a remote and online environment, but following it up and giving students an opportunity to still explore these things with their own hands and see things with their own eyes is really, we feel, is really valuable. And we're just going to look at the total number of students that have gone through our programs. We're focusing on second year and third year here, and you can see that before the pandemic, we had about 5 years. The 2016 number is just when I started. Ariel, I believe, began in 2017. So we've just been collecting it since then, and we had, around, let's say, 11 incidences. We've listed the type that are there. And then since the pandemic, we've only been collecting this data for about 2 years, and you can see that the number has gone up. And even though it's only over the span of 2 years, I would just say if you break that down on a year-by-year basis, we're seeing an increase in the number of incidents. Now, this could be that we have a pretty well-informed teaching team that knows to properly report these incidents when they happen. I'm kind of looking at Andre there because he really wants us to do that, and as we should. But we're also just seeing with our own observations that students are coming in, they're not as comfortable and safe in these environments. We've done a bit of digging into why that is, and for the most part, the last few years they've been online, there's been major cuts to hands-on experiences and experiential learning in general within their high schools and even before. So we're definitely seeing an impact on that, and we're looking at ways of making them feel safe in the lab, increasing their confidence in being able to do things, because they're going to need to be able to do it when they leave these walls, and just figuring out the best way to do that. So chemical process and safety, does this apply to me and why is it important in teaching, are some of the things that we would like for you to consider as we go through our talk. I'm going to turn it over to Ariel now that's going to walk you through this pictogram.
So if you look at this is what we call the chemical process life cycle. So our student in our engineering programs will start with thinking about how the chemicals be made in the very fundamental and chemical perspectives. So they go to the lab, they learn how to handle some of these chemicals, so they are in a micro scales. So you can see that they are considering chemical more just the fundamental chemical aspect. And when they get more senior, they start moving towards how the chemical react and how they can be produced in a larger quantity. So you can see that we start to optimizing them. And the pilot scale, some of our pilot scale equipment is like 2-story tall. So we are separating for example, ethanol, and that would be 2-story tall. And our students are working in those equipment. So you can see that the student moving away from just the chemical, wearing the protective equipment. We have a lot more consideration in it. And then later on, the students that will be off university go on to their PEY, professional experience year, co-op, summer job, or working in chemical industries. So this is where our student, when we're hoping our curriculum can train them from the very early on, all the way until they can handle chemicals by themselves, mitigating and also producing or creating new solutions to it.
So training at the appropriate level. I don't think it would be very effective if we just trained them all at the beginning of first year or second year and said, best of luck to you, remember all of this. We've heard some really great talks on being able to recall information at certain stages, giving students opportunities to revisit that information year after year, even within a year. It helps them be able to recall that really important information a lot what's the word I'm looking for? Consistently. So within our program, we have, given that first year is common, we may get some transfer students coming from like engineering science or materials and science and engineering. So we really start our safety training in second year. Our students focus on chemical handling, disposal, WMIS, labeling, reading SDSs, and emergency procedures. Then they move into third year. They do more occupational and process safety, fire safety, and compressed gases, because that's what they're going to be using within that laboratory environment. They do, like let's say, HAZOP analysis, checklist, PSA. Then within their fourth year, the students are going to be undertaking, let's say, a thesis project. They'll be able to do more specific training that's related to that particular thesis project. So we have a lot of students enrolling in, let's say, the bioengineering minor. They're going to be working in a bio lab. Biosafety is not part of our core curriculum because we don't have any labs that are focused around that. So we make sure that they get that additional training when they're going to be working in that type of environment. And then when they do their graduate studies, we have a safety program with our graduate students. And then even myself and Ariel as faculty, we also have to continue our safety training year after year. So being able to provide students with the right amount of training would get us to look at like not overloading them with information. Even the method of delivery is really, really important consideration. Do you just do virtual? We've kind of figured out that that doesn't work very well. We found that a combination of virtual and in-lab, making sure like even the time in which that happens in, is you doing it like within a 2-week span, or you doing it like online and the very next day you're getting your site training. All of those are things that we take into consideration as we design our curriculum. We appreciate that people have a packed curriculum, so even trying to add this in there, like, add something's got to come out, and you want to be able to really be able to emphasize the importance of it. And I think, just the data that we've collected with incidents in our labs is a message enough, and I know this is even happening within the faculty level. I'm actually really happy that Andre's here, because maybe he'd be able to answer any questions about the faculty level, that the increased number of incidences is not just, with respect to our department. The evaluation, theory, it's nice to know how to, I work in a lab, I spill some acid on the table, I can neutralize it with some base. I know that. I know my students know that because I have a quiz on it, and then boom, it happens, and they're like, what do I do? And they don't know what they're supposed to do. So it's really important that you do follow that up with like a simulation, or in that case, an actual event, in order to make them feel better prepared. So just to kind of get a sense of what this looks like within our second year training, we have about 1.5 hours of lecture during orientation. I go through all this material. Then we bring them to the actual lab space itself. We do site-specific training. We get them to locate different PPEs, so that's personal protective equipment, safety showers, eye wash stations, whatnot. Students have videos in which they can explore all of this. I'm hoping my computer allows me to do this. but within my own course, I have an entire module dedicated to safety, and I tell my students exactly what they need to do to prepare in order to go to the orientation, what they can expect during their site training, and then these are all the different videos that we've created in-house, or we link them to the ones that are available through EH&S. And the students have access to this throughout the entire term, so if they need to refresh their memory on something, they know that they can come back to do it right here. Then what we do is that we have a test. The test before COVID was in person. Now we've moved to an online format. I could speak to why we've made that decision. If students get below 70 or 80%, depends on when they're doing their test, they would have to retake the test. Again, they would rewatch the videos, redo it, and then if they pass, we would allow them to come to the lab. That doesn't mean that we don't do safety training throughout the term. Even though they've passed this all before their orientation, every single time they have a lab with me, they have to do a pre-test before their lab. This is in person, so it's literally right before they go and do the experiment, and there's certain safety questions that are related to that experiment that we get them to do that day. I quickly look at them. If they have failed it, then we make sure that the TAs are there to train them before they're able to continue on with their lab. So within that specific time, right then and there, they'll know what's right and wrong, and then how best to proceed. And we ask usually similar questions throughout the term, so that way if they got it wrong the first time, there's an opportunity for them to make it up, and we hope to make sure to look at to see if they're improving that knowledge throughout the term.
So when they progress into the upper year, as you can see from this pyramid, the student have the understanding of the basic of the chemical and occupational safety. So they know when they have to wear their PPE, they understand the chemical, the hazards and risk. So now on the upper year, we want them to start to apply, analyzing and evaluate or creating solution to mitigating some of the risk and understand how to managing of these risks. So we're utilizing multiple different way of the teaching to deliver the safety educations. So as what Jennifer just mentions, that she has those quiz, helping students to remember, to understand, and the student practice them in the lab. In the upper year, we start to have a more of a diverse of the practicals for them for that experiential learning on the safety educations, including we go on field trips. So we're gonna talk really quickly on those field trips just in the next few slides. We have a laboratory that can create this semi-control environment for them to see these type of a safety or when it happened. Students have case studies or some research that they can do to understanding more on the safety aspect. And we also have Minerva safety modules, which we're going to talk really briefly, and where the resources that you can obtain for your courses. We also have a lot of other resources, such as a CCPS from AICHE, which is American Safety Chemical Associations, and the process safety workshop to provide students with the different hierarchy technique. So these are some of the examples that are available within our university. So if you look at this, just a STEAM plan, they used to provide tours, but during pandemic time, we just provide them with some reading materials. So these would be something you can utilize to showcase some of the that connected with your teachings. Next one. So this is actually just the oxygen liquid oxygen vaporizer. They are around the university area, and even the one that's very close to the physics buildings. The students are able to see how the chemical process really happen, and they are very big, so they get to understand the compressed gas and all these chemical process that's happening with going from the liquid oxygens to a vaporized gaseous oxygen, how they can use in the hospitals. And we're also creating some online learning materials to help students to visualize those equipments. One more click. Yeah. So we're creating, this is all called digital twins. So they are identical to the lab, and then they can play in the virtual environment to see those equipments and how the valve should be closed or open, what would be their operational constraint. Yeah. The next slide.
What is it?
Sure. So this is one of the Minerva modules, and I think Jennifer has mentioned earlier. This is a great resources. They have 400 level, meaning student learning from a basic to more complex and more of a specialized area of a safety training, going from the chemical safety to electrical safety, as well as the including safety on mental and ergonomicals. And so there are a variety type of a safety, and the modules develop with the industry input, so the student have a more of a actual and realistic type of a terminology use and what they are expecting.
And actually, maybe just an interesting point on that, there's some colleges and university that are currently using Minerva modules. University of Toronto, engineering specifically, has access to these modules for free because we've paid a license for it, not me personally, but thank you, Tom Coyle. And we really do want to encourage people that these are accessible to you. They integrate very nicely with Quarkus, and the faculty is looking at a way of mapping it out. As Ariel said, there's 4 different levels, and even if you look at beyond maybe what we're talking about, which is chemical and process safety, with respect to mental health and wellness, Canada Post is currently using a lot of those modules as well to better train their workers. And I know the mental health and wellness one was a really big one that they were very interested in. So I teach the thesis course, and this is kind of an interesting one because it's very specific depending on what students are learning. But with respect to module content, they do get refresher from previous years. We have different types of training in like radiation, waste, buddy system, equipment and experimental design, designated substances. So these are things that students would have to do, look at. They complete what's called a research registration form that is very much focused on everything that the department needs to know about the experiment that they're conducting. It's a very intense form that they have to complete, but that has to be submitted, then approved by our safety committee. And then they also do have to take a safety test. Again, if they did not pass the test, they get to retrain by looking at the videos. And then within their laboratories, they have a designated supervisor that is meant to watch them or be with them and supervise their work as they complete their projects. So with respect to inclusion and individualized learning and safety education, we have a very specific definition here of inclusion that's been adopted by the University of Toronto. And what we mainly just want to say here with this slide is that we do have diverse learners and they have different needs. So some students are really great at taking tests, some students are not so much. Some students are really great at demonstrating their knowledge within the lab environment, some not so much. And we want to make sure that whatever we are creating for them, whether it be an online or an in-person experience, is one that's thinking about all the different learners that are in our classes. So just to summarize, we have in year 2, students are learning within a laboratory environment. We focus on chemical handling, OSHA, WMIS. In 3rd year, they're moving to a much larger scale lab. So we have where they're going to be looking at laboratory context and engineering profession, focus on process safety. They get another installment of safety training when they do their research project within their 4th year. And also when it comes to plant design and capstone courses, there's also talk around professionalism, ethics, and specific safety training that would be linked to, let's say, a particular piece of equipment that they're going to be using in their design for their plant. All of that is revisited within their 4th year projects. And then it doesn't just stop there in our department. When they do their graduate studies, we also have a suite of safety training modules. So because we do have a couple of minutes left, we did want to leave some time for questions. I just wanted to show you an example of, thank you, what is on our site with respect to the Minerva modules. Where did I find that again? Here we go. So my course is only given access to the first year and the 100 level and the second 100 level modules. But if I just want to open one up here, really hoping this works. Oh, my subscription is expired. Okay, good to know. I guess I'll just go back to this slide just so you guys can see it. But what's really important is the fact that the students are able to see text within the videos that are embedded. There's also captions so that if students, English is a second language, they have audio issues that they're able to still see things visually. So it's to make it more accessible for students. And then they do have self-checks, and then they're able to, again, revisit the material if they don't get it right the very first time. As an instructor, you can set, the level of which they have to get, like 70%, 80%, 90%, 100% in order for them to continue. So it's really nice and customizable. And again, it's accessible. And there's a variety of different types of modules that they have. One
One thing I wanted to add is that the grade completion can directly integrate it with the Quarkus, so you will be able to see the students have completed or they are not completed and what grades they have received.
Yeah. And maybe just as an example here for the 200 level, they have like managing risk, legislation codes and standards, mental health in the workplace, leadership and management systems, incident investigations, and professional engineering ethics. So even when it comes to filling out our incident reports, something that our students didn't quite know is like, why do we do that? So we have to explain to them the importance of doing that, the tracking that's done at the university level. So that was something that was a really unique opportunity for us to also include as an educational piece within our classes. So to kind of have a little bit of a discussion, we just wanted to kind of give you 3 prompt questions, and we tried to make it very general, not knowing the audience that was going to be here. But like, do you see a value for safety education in engineering or really any profession? What safety training and/or practices are currently available in your course or department? And do you see any challenges implementing safety in your courses, department, or even your job? So maybe get you just like a minute to think about them, and then we're happy to have you discuss these questions or any other questions that you have for us.
I got a question.
Yeah.
Somebody else has a question, which is, I understand that some of these safety training requirements expire, and you have to repeat it, and it also is applicable to faculty and staff who are working in those environments, and this has been a student-focused, teaching-focused forum, but how's that managing that, progressing over the past couple of years? I've been in touch with a little bit.
So I feel that for at least our department, moving everything to Quarkus has been really easy for us to streamline everybody's renewal of their safety training. That goes for like students, staff, and faculty. I know that before it was really challenging to do that when it was just kind of housed in this little area where you had to watch all these videos, and it wasn't really, you weren't really able to see, and I say we, the department, wasn't able to see what videos you had been watching, what you hadn't been watching. Issuing the test online has also been very helpful. It's making it a lot more accessible for people. It's like, I think we all agree that hopefully everybody agrees that safety training is really important. But you want to make it so that it's not going to be a huge roadblock for people. And I understand that the type of safety training that Ariel and I need is going to be different from the one that you need. But one thing that our department did recognize is that by having an in-person test was just a huge roadblock for people, and we weren't getting people to do it. Online, at least we give them lots of opportunities and a huge amount of time to complete it, and it's easier for us to follow up. We can also see what you've completed when it comes to EH&S, so we have access to that. We get any of our members of our department, whether it be student, faculty, or staff, to submit that safety training to us, so we can also document it within our department so that you're not required to maybe do it again if you've already completed it the first time, if it's not one that's required for you to get a refresher.
Do you have a database where you keep track of those completions then, or?
So we keep all of our modules are accessible through Quarkus, and then through SharePoint, which we call Beaker. That's something I'm just learning how to use this time. It has everything in there. So research registration form, which is for scientific-based research, even if it's computer, wet lab, whatever, and then any type of training that you've had gets documented and housed within that particular system. And there's a few people that have access to it, myself one of them, but we have a health and safety secretary, and then we also have a chair or 2 co-chairs on our health and safety committee, and they both have access to that information.
I have a question.
Sure.
I always have a question. So, Tom Coyle always, every year, he asks me to evaluate the Minerva modules and to see if we need to continue to pay as a faculty or not. EHS was involved. I asked my colleagues to evaluate, and we do extend the contract, but eventually, what I'm trying to understand, and I know your department was the most powerful advocate to keep them going. Other departments not so keen on many of the modules for different reasons. The quality of the slides and the dry delivery of the material, and how students disengage, how sometimes it's not really translatable to educational process. You know, in your case, it's so structurally translatable because it's more, you know, scaling up and industrial, and some even our industrial engineering department is not that industrial. So why, for example, use maneuver modules for, you know, investigations and incident accident reporting, or WMS or other things? Because EHS has equivalents of those trainings. They're free with Mentor ID. Anybody could take them and learn how what the due diligence looks like, what the WMS hazards looks like, what occupational health and safety required. We do mandate those to workers, graduate students, but not to undergraduate students. The departments are free to use those modules online as well and integrate into the curriculum and use what is existing in-house, you know, within the UofT, and kind of translate it through legislation how we do this at UofT. I just asking if if there is a preference for a reason.
Yeah, I'll maybe say two things, and then I'll let Ariel talk because she's used the Minerva modules more than myself. But I'll say that, so one, at the faculty, we've had discussions on where this safety training should be implemented. Some of us have had conversations on, should this be something that's done as like a micro-credentials, it's something that students should be doing in, let's say, the MEng program, because I feel that a lot of those modules, the content of it might be a bit more applicable to that than it would be at the undergraduate level. One thing I will say from my own experience of teaching second-year students, but then also having to go into industry and get safety training myself, it's not always as like, whoa, entertaining as it is within an academic environment. And the fact is that, from my understanding, the Minerva modules have been done in collaboration with industry. So like the standards and practices are the ones that are what's expected of our students in chemical engineering and also other engineering students. And the fact that it's done collaboratively with educators as well as industrial partners, people that are actually practicing, that's one of the things that we were drawn to. Whereas I'm not sure if that level of collaboration is happening within EHS in the development of those materials.
I think Jennifer has really well summarized in a lot of a great aspect of the Minerva modules, because right now we have trouble finding all the great substitutes. So we have to look out for from this source or that source. It just happened that Minerva, how they design their modules is going from the junior to more senior, and more simple to more complex of a understanding of the materials. And also because of a industry collaboration, a lot of terminology and expectation, it tend to fit closely with some of the curriculums. And I don't know about the other department, and I think another reason maybe not promoting, they don't know what is inside out modules, because not until you run through it, you always feel safety is always the same thing, very dry. They could be dry, but somehow if you do it right, it could be integrated into your curriculum quite easily. Is one extra assignment, quizzes the students been doing. I think for Minerva, they break it down to a bit finer, so you're able to pick and choose and give that varieties. So that's another positive things I have found when using Minerva.
And maybe the last point is that this is a conversation we had with iLead. When we look at leaders within safety education or even safety within the workplace, a lot of them are chemical engineers. So we appreciate that within industrial scale practices in those types of environments, it's really the chem-eng that is looked to of implementing like safety procedures and policies. I'll just use an example of like specialty chemicals, which is in Scarborough. We have 2 graduate students that are there, or they're graduates of our program, and they have been able to work alongside with chemists of all different types of natures and really implement safety practices within that particular organization that just wasn't there before. I'm a trained chemist, so it's not that like I don't know my safety, but I don't think of things the same way that an engineer thinks of. So Ariel being a trained engineer in chem-eng, we look at safety from 2 different lenses, and I would say that when it comes to safety practice, the discussion that we've had with other disciplines is that chem engs are kind of looked at as being the ones that it's very much ingrained in our curriculum, and they are looked at towards leaders. So maybe within the faculty, it makes sense that only some disciplines would really require it and read it to that level, just given who they're training.
And in your department, other professors who are teaching other courses, do they also utilize the same modules, the same tools, or it's a struggle to?
It is an ongoing project. In that, so I will just say that ChemEng is in a very unique position right now because we're doing a whole curriculum modernization and we're really mapping things out in all levels and all aspects. So safety is one of them. So basically being able to know resources that'll be there for like the next 5 years is one thing. And then once we have those resources identified, then we can properly map them out. So even the resources that are available have changed over the last 5 years to our department, which is why it may have been difficult for some of our colleagues to adopt them. But it's something that we're currently looking at our curriculum committee.
And do you plan to work for the next few years with EdTech, our faculty engineering EdTech team that organizes this symposium, to actually create your own content, your own safety content for?
Yeah. So I mentioned that like right now everything's housed within, or maybe I didn't mention it clearly, but everything is housed within like Ariel's course, my course. It's not like our departmental safety training that our faculty and staff usually go through. So we have looked at creating like a safety course in which we would then be able to track students' progress through that safety curriculum, and it wouldn't be like in our own individual courses. And that's something that the EdTech office can definitely help us with. Sure.
I'm UofT from the EHS office, and does the Minerva training is the aim? Sorry, you mentioned this. Is the aim of it to train students, to work in industry safely, or to work in the labs at UofT? Because is it one of the advantages is that they get the industry angle, but if they're working at UofT, that's different from them working in industry. So does it incorporate any UofT specific safety and the neuro courses?
Do you want to answer that question? I've talked a lot.
I think they're great questions. I think for university practice is eventually our student can work at the higher level, either in the lab or in industry. So there's a lot of common elements. I think for Minerva, they are not specifically just to address to the industry, but there's a lot of how the process is being implemented. Because a lot of time when we see safety, just like occupational, how do we protect ourselves? But when you're working with equipment, with the environment, there's a lot of moving parts. So the safety aspect, when we talk about that, it could be the entire process. And the module is try to emphasize in the process, and then also they have a more of a lower level, just to emphasize it on chemicals. So you are able to mix and match to see what is needed for your specific type of training. If it's more in the lab, you can select more at the lower level and to some of that extent. But when I'm teaching the courses, try to send my students ready for industry. That's more of with the projections. Then the student must know how to deal with the chemical safety and the process when the chemical equipment is manufacturing those process and safety culture and management aspect. So the higher level of the module can support a bit better in this aspect.
So students working in a lab with chemicals were to take the Minerva training, and that would count as the safety training.
Yeah. I will just say, so Minerva is one tool that we use, so I just don't want to make this be like, yeah. No, I'm just saying, like, so it's not like, yay, like Minerva, like we get a cut of it. No, it's one tool that we use. We feel when it brings that professional lens, that's something that we currently don't have at the university with industry standards, industry lingo. If they're going to be working in an academic lab, then yes, they may have a video on gas cylinder handling and training, but we also have those videos, and it would probably be better for the students to see what is currently at the University of Toronto, our policies, practices, and procedures, so that they're familiar with that, than maybe looking at like how this is done within Ontario, because that might be too big of a lens from them. I'll maybe even get further narrow. I work in Lash Miller, even though I'm technically in Wahlberg. The policies for chemical handling and waste is completely different in Lash Miller than it is in my own department. So I can appreciate that, like, even each department, each faculty is going to have certain safety procedures and practices, even though Ontario has a very general practice. And then Andre can definitely speak more to that. But I find it really interesting that, like, how I tell my students to dispose of chemicals, where things go, even like gloves, they cannot go here, they have to go here. And then it's different within the Wahlberg building, it's different within like the mechanical building. Every single department kind of has their own waste disposal procedure, even though Ontario will say you cannot throw stuff down the sink, you cannot throw stuff in the garbage. Like, it has to be properly disposed of. We can all agree on that, but then how we do that and how we train our students to do that is going to be slightly different. And that is also true within industry. Different companies will have different practices. So hopefully we've answered your question with that.
So please keep
Yeah.
in mind, we have a variety of training. We don't just rely on Minerva, but we just found it's a great resources if you want to connect the industry piece and also some specialized knowledge that it's not available that could be additional, like complementary to your teaching.
Yeah. And it may be a plug-in for Ariel, because she's done a lot of work in this, is that she's completely mapped out our unit operations lab. So if you ever wanted to get information on like a 2-story distillation column and have like a virtual immersive environment with that, she's done a lot of work in that area, and we're always happy to share our resources. Again, maybe we should have polled how many people were in different environments, but just saying that if you wanted access to that information, like, we're more than happy to share it with you.
Just to clarify very quickly, back to the topic, was it all implemented, many other models and online training videos during the pandemic because it was necessary? Or you were thinking about that before pandemic and pandemic just accelerated everything?
So a bit of both. In my course, because I've always done the safety orientation with my second-year lab course, there were some videos that were created, but not all. And we ended up recognizing, like, during the pandemic, that we couldn't obviously do things on campus, so we created more videos and have then continued to include those. Minerva, I believe, was something that was being piloted before COVID and then really ramped up and then started being implemented during COVID, and we decided to keep with it.
Yeah, our pilot was chemical engineering and computer engineering, so 2 courses were selected
Yeah.
for the pilot before we purchased the model. But yeah, great. Yeah. So I guess the pandemic had some positive impact on.
It did. Yeah. Sorry, we went over time, but thank you everybody for your attention.